It's February 15, 2003.
Around the world, millions of people took to the streets this weekend in strong opposition to a possible war against Iraq.
I was the mobilizing coordinator, and it was an incredible thing to be part of. Had this extraordinary turnout.
They are blocking off from 52nd Street all the way down to 72nd Street.
Even today, it's considered one of the largest protests in world history.
And it didn't stop the war.
And that pattern has repeated itself a lot recently. Occupy Wall Street activists protested income inequality for months, and nothing happened. The Dakota Access Pipeline is still being constructed. And despite the millions of people who showed up to the women's marches, there hasn't been any sort of concrete policy change. These protests are highly attended and widely covered by the media. So why haven't they actually changed anything?
You can't put too much burden on a single protest, because every year on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, they show King giving his "I Have a Dream" speech.
I have a dream that one day.
And then, of course, we're reminded that the movement won these great laws. It's almost as if King gave a good speech and then change happened. Well, actually, not so much.
And he's right. The March on Washington in 1963 was one protest in the 14 years that made up the civil rights movement. But in the end, it was also successful. It helped pass laws that ended segregation.
President Johnson addresses a joint session of Congress to push a voting rights bill aimed at ending discrimination.
The key to success is making life miserable for powerful people. If you can't do that, you're probably not going to win.
So what happened between then and now?
The March on Washington was organized by a coalition of long-established civil rights groups who had staffs and a structure and mailing lists. When the women's marches happened, that began with a Facebook post.
This is what democracy looks like.
The internet happened. These days, you can summon a crowd of millions with a hashtag. And whether or not that's a good thing is largely debated.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot!
This is writer and sociologist Zeynep Tufekci. In her TED Talk, she says,
in embracing digital platforms for activism and politics, are we overlooking some of the benefits of doing things the hard way? Today's protests have become a bit like climbing Mount Everest with the help of 60 Sherpas. And the internet is our Sherpa.
The civil rights movement didn't have the speed and power of social media. They had to be very deliberate in their tactics. For example, in the spring of 1955, a 15-year-old girl named Claudette Colvin was arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a bus. If she had been arrested today, it would have been all over Twitter. But the NAACP waited for someone to build their entire campaign on. Someone who was an older, more experienced activist who could withstand the media pressure.
We were to achieve equal rights.
Parks was arrested on a Thursday. On Monday, the Montgomery bus boycotts began. And they lasted for more than a year.
Consider this. The civil rights movement in the United States navigated a minefield of political dangers, faced repression, and overcame. One major policy concessions. In contrast, 3 years after Occupy sparked that global conversation about inequality, the policies that fuel it are still in place.
But Kaufman thinks that policy isn't the only way a protest can change society.
The work of protests is complicated, and it often unfolds over time. Protests can change the conversation, can change the terms of a debate about an issue.
In 2011, researchers studied another famous movement that started online, the Tea Party.
You ready for a tea party? Yeah!
Its first big protest was on April 15, 2009, Tax Day. And it just so happened that it rained that day. Researchers found that in places where it rained, turnout was lower than places where it was sunny. And the rallies in districts that had sunny weather, where more people showed up to protests, also had a higher turnout for the Republican candidate in the 2010 congressional election. In fact, every protester who attended added between 7 to 14 more votes. So protests, they work because they inspire people who attend them to be more politically active.
There's something about being in a crowd of people who share your passionate feelings about an issue that has an extraordinary power. It has a power that affects the people there and gives them the sense of purpose and hope to keep doing all the kinds of other work that it really takes to create change.